It's my honor now to welcome His Excellency Amr Moussa, accompanied by David Ignatius. His Excellency Amr Moussa is a veteran politician and diplomat of over 50 years of service to Egypt and to the broader Middle East. Mr. Moussa served as Egyptian's foreign minister for over a decade, and that was immediately followed by a term as Secretary General of the Arab League, which spanned the period from 2001 through 2011, including the NATO's intervention in Libya. Exciting times. He ran for president of Egypt in the 2012 election, and then he went on to found Egypt's Congress Party. In 2013, Mr. Moussa presided over the Committee of 50, which was tasked in drafting the new constitution, and this could have been one of his greatest achievements. It was approved by popular referendum in January, as we've all read. He's an accomplished statesman, and he's now top advisor to presidential candidate Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. The Middle East Institute is very grateful to David Ignatius as moderator of our discussion today. David is well known to all of us, of course, as an accomplished novelist and as a journalist. His commentary in the Washington Post is not to be missed by anybody who's interested in international relations, and particularly the Middle East. But in addition to his position as associate editor and contributor to the Post-Partisan blog, David is a prolific author of spy novels. And his next one, and we're all waiting for it, is called The Director, and it will be published in June. I don't know how he has time to write all of these things, because I don't really have time to read everything he writes. but he's amazing. He wrote last November in a column about Egypt that the Egyptian people adopted a slogan, "We just want to live." And David wrote about that slogan, yes, people want to live, but with the freedom and the dignity that the revolutions promised. That is the desire of the Egyptian people and of all of us here today, and we sincerely hope it will be realized. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Amr Moussa and David Ignatius.
Thank you.
So yes, I'm going to ask Amr Moussa to begin by saying a few words, and then we'll turn to a conversation.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Chamberlain. I'm really very happy to be back in this beautiful city, most important one, a capital of international politics. I'm here thanks to the invitation of this institute to talk about Egyptian-American relations and the new paradigm we are trying to establish. I've been here several times, of course, all through the career as described by Ambassador Chamberlain, and I thank you very much for this very elegant introduction, which I liked very much, by the way. I remember the last time I was here, also David moderated a debate, and that was all about the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now we are talking about the change in the Middle East, a different Middle East. A Middle East that needs and desires to be part of the 21st century. That applies to the Arab countries and other countries in the region. We need stability, we need economic development, we need peace, fair peace. We need to live together and to chart for the future. The future is very important for us, especially that over 60% of the population of Egypt and the population of the entire Arab world belong to the young category below 35 years of age, with all the aspirations that they carry for a better life and for the rights and freedoms to be respected. And I'm really honored to have been the chairman of the Constituent Committee to draft the Egyptian constitution that has been approved last January. It's a liberal constitution stipulated for the rights, freedoms, future, separation of powers, no dictatorship, democracy. And this will be the basis for our work for the future. I am sure that our next president, when elected in the next 3 weeks, will start by a declaration of respect to the Constitution and put forward a plan for the economic development, for the social justice, for the positive role of Egypt in our region. One of the priorities, as I understand, from following the activities of the campaigns, different campaigns, that General Sisi, that Field Marshal Sisi, is really for the giving priority for a different, positive, constructive relationship between the United States and Egypt. This is a very important priority that I feel both of us in the United States and in Egypt should work for and guarantee a different 21st century style relationship. I am now going to answer the questions posed by David, and I hope he won't go in the same style about what is going on in Egypt, because indeed the reporting coming from Egypt was not that accurate, did not reflect the development, the mood, and the aspirations of the Egyptians in a more peaceful life and more prosperous one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moussa, for that introduction. I asked Amr Moussa if I should address him as Your Excellency or Mr. Minister, and he said, "Call me Amr Moussa."
That's
so
right.
I don't want you to think I'm being disrespectful.
You can alternate with Your Excellency also.
Well, we'll throw in a few of those. Looking around the room, I think it's safe for me to say that this is a room full of people who care about Egypt. And so I think that's the basic context for our discussion. And in caring about Egypt, we are deeply concerned about where it's going. So I think we all welcome a chance to speak to someone like you who's been central to Egypt's life for so many decades. And I want to begin by asking you about a statement that was made, I believe, on Monday by General al-Sisi, which seemed to be one of the indicators of what's ahead. And he said it was his intention to eliminate the Muslim Brotherhood once he became president of Egypt from Egyptian life. I assume that means continue its illegality, continue arrests of those who were members. So I want to begin by asking you, is that wise policy? And if the Muslim Brotherhood is to be eliminated, what happens to the millions of Egyptians who have looked to the Muslim Brotherhood as their political home? Where are they going to go? And how is Egypt going to be governed in a stable way if that part of Egyptian society is excluded politically?
Well, thank you very much, David. Let me start by expressing my gratitude as an Egyptian citizen for this attention given to the affairs of Egypt. I know that in the 21st century, the globalized world, we will have to work together and to accept criticism and to discuss issues, and also talk about our point of view, whether we differ or we agree, with all powers. So it is a positive thing, in my opinion, to have the affairs of Egypt discussed in so many conferences, in so many roundtables and meetings. That is my first point. My second point, concerning your question. First of all, let us agree that the whole region of the Middle East is going through a serious operation of change. That the Middle East will never be the same within a year or two or three. It will be totally different because of the dynamism of our societies and the aspiration of the majority of our people for a better future. The third point is about what you said, General Sisi has said yesterday. I don't think he talked about elimination, but he talked about a firm stand against terrorism and violence. Those who would want to sow havoc in our society, use violence in their dealing with the rest of the population, sneak into Egypt, in Sinai and elsewhere, to do what they do best, kill people, create chaos in societies. This is what General Sisi has meant. He will certainly, as president, if elected, will bear a major responsibility to ensure the population that they will be secure, that their children will not be killed in the streets, that the universities will work as universities, not as places of battles and throwing bombs and killing students. This is his responsibility. Had he not said so, the people would have demanded that he should stand firm, and I believe that General Sisi will lead a firm policy that Egypt should be free from terrorism. But at the same time, I am confident that the next president, whoever he will be, he will have to act within the confines of the Constitution, respecting the rights and the obligations of the people he is going to rule. Also, as the Constitution stipulates, the president is the president of Egypt, but he has to act together with the parliament, the legislative, and the government. There is no dictatorship created by the Constitution. It will be a democratic one. Within the confines of these democratic principles, the president, the government, the parliament will have to be very firm with all acts of terrorism and violence. This is my answer to that question.
I can't imagine anyone in this audience, or indeed in Washington, would disagree that combating terrorism is important. The question I was asking was a little bit different, and with apologies, I want to ask it again in a slightly different way. Is there room in the Egypt whose constitution you helped draft, that you and I talked about in Cairo just a few months ago, is there room in that Egypt for an Islamist political party that campaigns, that runs candidates for parliament, that offers an opportunity for people who have Islamist political feelings to vote for?
Yes, David. The Constitution of 2014 is different from the Constitution that has been drafted and adopted under the rule of Muslim Brotherhood. It does not exclude any citizen. It does not prevent any citizen from participating in the political life and in the life as an Egyptian citizen, including anybody that believes in what the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups do believe. But it has to be through democratic means. That the Constitution has not eliminated or prevented any citizen, regardless of his or her affiliation. So through this, there is a parliamentary election coming up. Why don't they field their candidates If they win, it is democracy. But I believe, and here I refer to what you have said in your first question, that many do support the Muslim Brotherhood. I tell you that many have changed their minds. It will be very clear, and you will see in the parliamentary elections that they have already lost an opportunity to prove that they are capable of ruling, capable of serving the Egyptian interests, capable of understanding the mood of Egyptians. They failed the 3 counts. And therefore, I believe, answering your question, yes, indeed, there is a way for them. Through democratic means, through the participating in the elections, accepting the new constitution, and stopping violence.
And these Islamists who under the new constitution would be free to run candidates for parliament, would they be free to do that under the banner of the Muslim Brotherhood, or would they have to form new parties?
Well, there are 2 things in the constitution. First, you can form a party by notification. That's easy to form whatever party you need. But also the Constitution has stipulated that parties should not be based on religion and religious considerations.
So this would be, I take it, this application to form a party would be subject to a ruling by an Egyptian court as to whether it fit the definition.
Well, the principle is that you are free to establish your party. The party has to call for based on political considerations, and how to rule Egypt, how to reform Egypt, how to serve Egypt, and meet the demands of Egyptians. This is open for them.
And just to take this issue a little bit further, because it's of such deep concern here, and I know in Egypt, that there is in Washington, in Europe, a fear that attempts to deal with what's seen by your government, by General al-Sisi as the Muslim Brotherhood's terrorism, will have the effect of driving people who supported Morsi underground into some kind of new Islamic underground, and that far from solving the problem of terrorism, it will recreate that problem in a new and perhaps even more dangerous form down the road. And I want to ask you directly, how would you respond to that worry, which is deeply felt here?
Well, there are always 2 scenarios: optimistic, open scenario, pessimistic, and narrow scenario. You say, there is a possibility that they would drive underground. I say there is a possibility for them to compete in elections and prove to the world that we have this support, we have those deputies in the parliament, we can do that. So, as I said, they have to renounce violence, accept the constitution, and move in, away from terrorism. If they want terrorism, then what John Sisi has said will apply. We cannot accept, any government worthy of the name cannot accept that a certain group of people form militias and terrorize the population. It cannot, and it will not happen.
The election for president is coming up May 26 and 27, I think. So just in a few weeks, as Wendy Chamberlain said. And I think I'm right in saying that General al-Sisi is really not well known to most Americans, even those who follow Egyptian policy closely. He's a military man. He may be known to our military leadership. You're now an advisor to General al-Sisi. And so I want to ask you to help us, not with a campaign pitch, but from your knowledge, what kind of president would he be like? What should we expect from him?
Well, we should expect a firm president within the confines of the Constitution. We should expect that he is a nationalist president, but he is not a populist one. He's not going to speak in the streets and carrying slogans, but he is a doer, and that is what we need. The country, our country, in the last few years, not only the 3 years, but it was even back a few years, is in a very difficult situation. It is under severe pressure, economically, politically, security, and so on. We need to reform all our files, from education to healthcare to the agriculture, etc. So he will be busy, and he must be busy, with the file of reform, the rebuilding of the country, and securing the country at the same time against terrorism and violent groups. So he will have to be firm. He knows what kind of priorities he has to decide in the domestic policies, in the regional politics, as well as international politics. And we need the cooperation of all. This will be his priority, and I believe he will start from day one by showing that he is a different president. He wants to rebuild. He's no dictator, but he wants everybody to do the job he is assigned to. And I like that.
So, just taking this question of economic policy a step further, President Mubarak, by most people's account, made many mistakes, but one area in which his policy was in many ways successful was in economic reform, opening up Egypt to more private sector activity, to more foreign direct investment. He had some very solid ministers, prime ministers. And I want to ask whether you think, based on your relationship with General al-Sisi, that he will follow that approach. There's concern because he's coming from the military that this big military-linked sector of the Egyptian economy will continue to be a kind of heavy weight. I almost want to say dead weight, but that's not fair. What about that? Do you see him following the kind of opening to the private sector of the late Mubarak years, or is that going to take some time?
Well, look, I don't think candidate al-Sisi, when he becomes president. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I'm trying to save my tie because
It's always a good policy.
No, Mr. Sisi will not be Mr. Mubarak. Yes, indeed, in several years during the rule of President Mubarak, the country achieved a good percentage of progress in the economic indicator. But the difference is that this progress did not trickle down to the poor classes. Now, General al-Sisi will have to make sure that whatever progress Egypt would make in the economic indicators, all economic indicators, that all Egyptians would enjoy the results of such progress. Not only one class and the rest are full of frustration. This is what he is going to eliminate. So, no, he will be different.
And so that difference sounds a little more like the more traditional left Nasserist state sector controlled kind of Egyptian economy that I remember from some years ago than the late Mubarak years. Do I have that? Is that what we should expect?
No, I don't. I disagree with that point of view. It is not the time for public sector nationalization, sequestration, and so on. The Constitution prevents that anyway. The important thing is that we are, and we know, and he knows, that we live in an era of private sector activity, a private sector role, and the private sector already moves over 75% of the Egyptian economy.
It keeps falling, and so maybe this would be easier.
Okay, thank you very much. So, it It is the private sector. It is the market economy, rationalized, because we have 50% of our population live under or around the poverty line. It is not a question of socialism or of the old policy of Mr. Nasser, but it is a policy that takes into consideration the real situation in the country. So we cannot just to get the approval or the smiles or the applause of certain circles that we ignore the poor. This is not socialism, this is realism. We have to cater to this, to those people. 50% were left uncatered for. And we need, this is a country that will be 100 million people within a few years. We have to create wealth. And this is the thing that the next president will have to work for. And all of us should help him creating wealth. And the country is capable of doing so. But our drawback, our weakest point was the bad management of the country. Era after era, president after president, the bad management of the country. And we have seen that, we have lived that for 1 year under Mr. Morsi. We knew the real definition of bad management. We need the good management, good governance. This is the key for success.
So let me ask you how you, as an advisor and supporter of General al-Sisi, would advise him to draw in the talent that you would need to really get the Egyptian economy growing again at the 5% rates it experienced under President Mubarak. It's often said that the great failure of President Morsi was that he didn't find a way to reach out to other parties and individuals and draw them into government. How could General,
reaching out.
So, well, yeah. Whatever he did, how can General al-Sisi, if he's elected president, be inclusive and draw in the talent, reassure people who, frankly, when many of us talk to Egyptian reformers, liberals, people who could help in this project, we hear a lot of anxiety. How can he reach out to them and alleviate that anxiety?
Yeah, again, you are talking about the president that has to do everything. This is democracy. There will be a parliament, deputies, debates about issues, and he can reach the people through addressing them or talking to the parliament and catering to the program, the economic program and social program, as the president within the confines of the new constitution. And people are ready. Yesterday, for example, when he was expected to participate in an interview with two anchors, people stayed at home to listen, to assess, to follow what he was saying. And he said a lot about, and he will continue today. I haven't seen yesterday, but the reports coming from Cairo confirm that people were so pleased with what they heard from him. They were waiting for that. He is one of those Egyptians that understands that Egypt is in a very difficult spot, and he has to lead Egypt in the economic field, in all other fields, in the operation to rebuild the country.
Let me turn to the question of the U.S.-Egyptian relationship, which is one of our key topics today, and ask you frankly, I've been going to Egypt since 1980, and I can't ever remember a time when the relationship at the bedrock was as bad as it is now. Egyptians just seem really angry at the United States. And I want to ask you to explain first why that's so, and second, what people like the people in this room should, in your judgment, do about it. How are we going to get away from this blockage to something better?
Okay. First of all, let us agree, and you know the Egyptians seen very well, this element of hating the US is not there. So we are starting from a good basis for understanding. We admire the US, and we cooperated for so many years and decades, in fact. We had difference of views. We disagreed with certain lines of policy by the United States, but this did not bring us to confrontation or a serious breakdown. Now, after the two revolutions, or what took place in 25th of January 2011, it was a revolution against Mr. Mubarak's regime, and the 30 June 13, it was a revolution against Mr. Morsi's regime. The position taken, or the perception, is that U.S. Diplomacy policy at a certain moment supported Muslim Brotherhood and that they should stay. The Egyptian people want them to leave. The perception was that the US wanted them to stay. That made it very difficult to have an understanding. Now that we are talking and moving to the future, I can say that's my impression, is that the United States understand the predicament of Egypt, or in Egypt, and accepts that there is a new constitution, a new president coming up, a look to the future, a futuristic kind of policy. I think, I put it in a very brief thing, that we need a new paradigm for relations. That we work together, we bear in mind your interests, US bears in mind our interests, and the interests of the Arab world, in the Middle East, and this is very important. That's number one. Number two, we hear about the pivot Asia, that the US wants to leave. Of course, it's not a question of just driving, taking the car and leaving, but they wants to leave. After participating in so many policies that have led us to what we are facing today. The world has changed. If there will be a pivot out, there will be a pivot in. And there will be also our point of view put on the table, our point of view as Arab countries, as Middle Eastern countries, as a group of countries that will be affected by the US policy, positive or negative. So the best thing is for us to sit and talk about the future of the Middle East, the future of the political and security issues. For example, with the wave of change in the Middle East, in the many Arab countries, and it is coming up, moving in different shapes, what kind of regional system that should be adopted? Are we going to continue along the same lines, organizations, the same business as usual? Or the change in the societies, change in goals will behoove us and should behoove us to create a new regional system? That is one. The regional security system. Could we all live in such a region with those threatening propositions? Or we have to talk about what kind of regional security system that would come up or should come up. Three, that if there is a plan, or some of the think tanks here, as usual, just look to the future from different angles and see that perhaps a country A could play a very important role in the future of the region. This country A cannot, in the opinion, or country I, let me say, in the opinion of so many in the Arab world. The era of Sykes-Picot is over, when the foreign ministers of France and Britain sat to draw the map of the Middle East. This is over. I don't think the Secretary of State in the United States and Mr. Lavrov, Foreign Minister of Russia, could sit and say, now this Middle East will be planned as follows. This will not happen. It is over. We are in the 21st century. Nothing will be done except with our participation, knowing, accepting that you have interests, but we have interests too.
I think as ambitious as Secretary Kerry is, he does not aspire to be either Mr. Sykes or Mr. Picot.
By the way, I didn't say so. He is Mr. Kerry, so I know that. But we're just talking about that. The era of Sykes-Picot is over.
Well,
That's it.
So a final question for me, and then I want to ask the audience to begin thinking of your questions for Mr. Moussa. And I want to ask this last question truly as someone who was has always deeply enjoyed Egypt, respected the Egyptian people. When I read in the newspaper last month that an Egyptian judge in Minya has sentenced to death 680 people in the death of one policeman, as it was reported, I'm troubled. And I'm troubled even more, and I say this to you, somebody who's known you for many years, that more Egyptians don't speak out and say, this isn't our country. We don't do things like this. So I want to ask you to reassure us and tell us, was that legal judge in Minya speaking for Egypt when he condemned 680 people, or was that something that should be reversed?
Well, had I read the same report, the way it was reported, I would have felt the same, definitely. But we have to talk about the way of reporting. I don't want to tell you that you read the wrong newspaper, but the wrong reports. I don't know whether I can use, say, 5 minutes to explain. The figures are wrong. What was reported to the Grand Mufti was a whole case of 529, with those condemned to the capital punishment, those condemned to prison, those were proven innocent. For him to consider the whole case in order to give back the idea as he deems fit. More than 2/3 of this figure were tried in absentia. Therefore, the judgment does not hold according to the law. The number of those who were condemned to capital punishment is much less than that. I don't suggest that we enter into this game of figures and numbers. But by law, the moment a judge pronounces his judgment that X or 1 or 2 or 7 are condemned to death, the moment the public prosecutor is by law ordered to challenge the judgment and appeal to the higher court. And that's what happened. The higher court traditionally refers the whole case back to a different panel of judges to consider it anew from zero. Then gets back to the same higher court. There are guarantees for that, a lot of guarantees. And the public prosecutor has already challenged that. And we are waiting to see what will happen. So all this, those developments have not been reported. That the judgment stands suspended the moment it is uttered, because the public prosecutor will have to challenge that. Having said all that, I agree that it is the figures and the way it was reported created a lot of confusion. And as I said in the beginning, had I read it without knowing the details, I would have taken the same position as you are. Again, we are moving towards a different Egypt under the new constitution, which shall start to apply with the election of the president and the election of the parliament. I believe that there will be a lot of activities to revisit what kind of institutions we have, laws we have, but above all, we have to respect the judgment and deal with it through the process of law.
Thank you for answering that directly. That's helpful. I want to turn now to the audience. What I'm going to do is take a couple of questions at a time and then ask Mr. Moussa to respond to them. I see a hand up here and the gentleman right next to you, so let's start with these two.
Thank you, Mr. Moussa. My name is Delphine Algan. I'm the U.S. Director of Reporters Sans Frontières, Reporters Without Borders. And I would like to ask you a question regarding the journalists detained in Egypt.
The what?
The
Journalists.
Journalists detained in Egypt.
Apologize for my French accent. So I'm thinking especially to the Al Jazeera journalists who are detained since December. And I would like to ask you if you think that their detention is violating the freedom guaranteed by the Egyptian constitution, and if they should be released immediately. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good. Let's let you go ahead and answer that, and then we'll turn to this gentleman.
Should I
Yes, go ahead.
take
Yes, sir.
several questions?
Well,
and answer
that's
that?
you know,
Perhaps better.
there's issues of journalist freedom are so important. Go ahead. Answer that, and then we'll turn to the next gentleman.
It is so important, definitely. And the basic thing is that the country is under severe stress, with chaos shooting out, creating difficult situations for the society itself. But the point is that they were all referred to the tribunals. They were not summarily just held in prisons, but their cases were put to the tribunals in order to see what kind of offense they have committed under the existing laws. The freedom of journalists, freedom of press, is something very important and essential for a free society. And the new constitution has stipulated, in fact dealt with that in so many articles, successive articles. But bear in mind that Egypt is going through abnormal times. That makes it necessary sometimes to take this or that action. But I believe that all this will come to an end once the country stabilizes.
Yes, you, sir, and this gentleman here. Let's take those two questions.
Thank you, Your Excellency. My name is Sanjeev Berry, and probably in keeping with this theme, I'm going to ask a question with regards to human rights as well.
Will you raise your voice?
Sure. Sanjeev Berry with Amnesty International USA. We'd spent a fair amount of time discussing the Muslim Brotherhood. I wanted to ask about an organization or a group on a very different end of the political spectrum in Egypt. That is the April 6th movement.
Asking about the 6 April movement.
Yeah.
The April 6th movement, of course, as many folks here know, was involved in the protests that led to the toppling of former President Mubarak. Today, not only are two of the leaders of the April 6th youth movement in prison, 3-year prison sentences with labor, but the movement has itself been banned by an Egyptian court, and I wanted to hear your comments on that. Thank you.
In fact, my comment will be similar to my answer to the previous question. I understand the importance given to 6th of April in several countries, but I understand also that Egypt, under the present pressure, will have to deal perhaps differently that you think and you believe. But again, all this will be for the future regime in Egypt to deal with in accordance with the constitution and what it stipulates. But we have to put an end to chaos in Egypt, while, of course, respecting the rights and the obligations of our citizens. And this will be applied, I believe, with the ascendance of the new president, that will see how to deal with that and, in fact, bring back stability to the country and put an end to the chaos or the anarchy, even if it is creative anarchy.
So this gentleman here, yes, please.
My name is Amin Mahmoud. I'm with the Center of Egyptian-American Relations. And one of the objectives and the slogan of the 2011 revolution is no to military rules. Do you support this revolution objective to reject the interference of the military generals in ruling Egypt? Especially they control 40% of the economy. And that democracy will never come to Egypt with the military rules, even they wear military uniform or civilian uniform. 40% of the economy controlled by the military. They have the slave labor, which is the people who are drafted. They don't take salary, but the regular salary as a drafted, which is 140 Egyptian pound a month, and that's very low, and that prevent people from getting a job in that sector. Whatever in military, in gas station or factory or anything, the military control. The military don't pay any taxes, and they keep the money to themselves somehow.
Good, thank you. Good question. Yes, sir.
Good questions.
Well, it's a good question about the future of military rule.
All right. I see the gentleman is following the developments in Egypt, from gas stations to the little aspects of economy, but do not pay attention to the dire situation and challenges our country is facing. First, it is not a military rule. It is a constitutional rule. Elections. An ex-army officer, like ex or former generals that have been elected presidents in many countries. So it is not the commander-in-chief of the army that is running. It is the former commander-in-chief that is running. And within the confines of a civil constitution, liberty, with liberties, with freedoms, and with democracy and democratic stipulations. Some of what you have said may prove to be right, only some. That the economy and the situation in the economy and the contribution of this or that institution to the Egyptian economy. But the Egyptian economy itself is not in a good shape, with or without what you have said. We have to rebuild that economy. We have to open up, and we have to do everything we can in order for the country to move on. As you have mentioned so many things that we have read before as a citizen, I know what kind of criticism, what kind of claims that are being circulating. But I want you to know that Egypt is going to open a new page. Egypt is going to move on. Egypt is going to join the family of democracies. Egypt is the Egypt of tomorrow, not Egypt of yesterday.
And Mr. Moussa, just to be clear, would you think that the share of the economy that is controlled by the military, would it be your advice to General Sisi that share should decline?
No, it's not a question of shared by the army. There are companies there, like you have here, but I'm not sure about this 40%. But then the economy itself, our economy is so weak. We have to rebuild that economy. And building that economy will only come from foreign investments, from active economic policy, from reigniting the industrial and agricultural and touristic work. That is the important thing for such an economy to take the country out of the abyss in which we are. Who contributes what and when and under what circumstances, the new page will tell.
The woman here, and then Marina behind her, Marina Ottaway.
Thank you. My name is Nancy O'Kale. I'm the Executive Director of the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. Mr. Moussa, you were heading the Arab League at a time where the Middle East and the Arab world look very different than they are today. How do you see the picture today, and what kind of relations that Egypt can forge that would support its path to democratic process and at the same time maintain its independence?
I'm sorry, I have difficulty as you had difficulties with my microphone. I do have difficulty with this microphone.
Yes. So, do you want to just summarize in one sentence the question?
So how do you see the situation in the Middle East in general, or the Arab world right now, and how could Egypt forge strong relations that would support its path to democracy and at the same time maintain its independence?
Did you? Yes.
Well, again, the Middle East itself will change and is changing. The priorities, of course, are different than what it used to be. But we need peace, definitely. We need stability. We need security. Those goals, we need development. Those goals have not changed. And we have to work to achieve them, perhaps through different means, within a new spirit of cooperation, of understanding, of assessment that 21st century policies and politics are not exactly the politics of last century. And that now the challenges that we meet are far different and wider and more serious than what we used to have. At a certain moment, it was one question, one problem that is preoccupying all of us. Now we have more. The one exists, continues to preoccupy us. But other problems also, other files came to the fore. So when we talk about Egypt for this occasion, I also talk about the collective work of the Arab world and how we are going to face the future, solving problems, building a new system, extending our hands to whoever wants to cooperate with us, and having a new order. We must have a new order in the Middle East. But this new order requires a lot of work and of different attitudes by all of us, with no exception.
And just to follow up, Mr. Moussa, there's some in the Arab world, in Jordan, and I think in Egypt too, who are asking, with the situation in Syria so chaotic and dangerous, is it time to reopen some dialogue with the regime there of President Bashar al-Assad? What do you think about that?
Well, I think the situation concerning Syria is as follows. The big powers have mismanaged this question. The Geneva type conferences cannot solve the problem. It can only create some comfortable feeling that, countries are meeting and there is a Geneva conference and that will produce something. In Davos last January, I was asked, what do you think we will be doing if we meet the same January 2015 in the same place? I said, I'm afraid we'll be discussing the results of Geneva 15. This is too much. This is absolutely unacceptable. It would lead nowhere. Public debate and small group of countries are dealing with that. I think that a small table, a round table like this one, with America and Russia, with Turkey and Iran, with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan, should be present and discuss it and see what should be done. One country cannot do it. We see the hesitation here. We see the policy of Russia that is on a different keel altogether. The countries in the region and the Arab countries in particular will have to participate. I see until now there is no role for Arab countries. They have to be there. And any deal in their absence will be no deal. It will not last.
Marina.
Yes. Marina Ottawa with the Woodrow Wilson Center. Mr. Moussa, I am having some trouble reconciling what I have read about the Constitution. I have spent a lot of time with that, which certainly has very strong protections for human rights, for political rights, and so on paper, with what is happening in Egypt right now. Because it does not seem to me that sort of trials that condemned a large number of people in a very short period of time do in fact correspond to the due process of law that the Constitution does protect. You have also, it's also difficult to see the banning of certain organizations and so on, the arrest of journalists. Now, what my point is, does that, and you have replied to all the questions, saying you have to understand how difficult the situation is, how dire the period that Egypt is going through. Does that mean that for the time being, the Constitution cannot be applied? In other words, that this is a Constitution that it's far too liberal and democratic for the circumstances, because it seems to me that that's the implication.
Well, thank you very much. The Constitution will have to be applied, but we need a lot, and the Constitution, as stipulated, need laws to be passed by the Parliament in order to put the Constitution into effect and to change the existing laws according to the new stipulations of the Constitution. And we expect that, as I was explaining, once all the institutions have been in place, the election of the President, the election of the Parliament, and the task before the Parliament is to legislate the laws called for by the Constitution that would guarantee, protect the rights and freedoms of people. And here now, in this very serious transitional period that I hope will come to an end within weeks, the situation is really challenging, by people being killed every day in this or that street, in this or that city, by the institutions that are not functioning, like universities and so on. So any responsible government will have to take firm decisions, especially under the existing laws. But for the Constitution, which of course I believe in each and every word that has been written in this Constitution, will have to be the first order of business for the next Parliament that will be in place, I believe, at the end of this summer. So there is no contradiction here, although generally speaking, yes, of course, there is a Constitution that has called for 1, 2, 3, 4. But in order for this 1, 2, 3, 4 to be implemented, we need the law to be changed. For the judge, he will see what the law says. He does not have to interpret the Constitution. Yes, indeed, you are right, but I hope that you understand what I'm saying. It is a transitional period, very difficult. Situation is absolutely dangerous, but it is moving in the right direction. Every day it is less dangerous than before. And with a new Constitution, new stipulations, new spirit, looking to the future, I believe many of those things that required or led to criticism will be dealt with in a very firm and objective way.
Judith Kipper and the gentleman after her, you sir, yes.
It's good to see you here and hear you as well. Let's talk about the period after the removal of Morsi. I want to ask you about the army, which in Egypt, and certainly removing Mubarak in 18 days, was an instrument of the state and not the man. That changed after Morsi was gone. So I want to ask you about the army, the security forces, and the police. The violence, the arbitrary arrests, the massacre in the streets of the Muslim Brotherhood camp, the torture, the 500, 600 leaders that are currently in jail, including the Al Jazeera journalists. When we hear official Egypt say, we're in a terrible period, isn't it true that bad management of the post-Morsi period by the military, the next man who's going to be president, the security forces, and the police created a chaotic situation that makes Egypt more dangerous every day. More unemployment, more poverty, more arrests, more harassment, more torture, more censorship, more people staying home because they're again afraid of their government.
Well, Judith, that is a speech, not a question. And I disagree with you. It is not more of what you have said, but much less. And not only the words that you have mentioned, many of them are really false expression of the situation. But let us agree that it is a difficult situation. And we need this new page, new Egypt, to deal with all those issues in a different way, with the constitution, with the new president, with the new spirit that is engulfing Egypt, young and old and from all walks of life. So I take your criticism. I disagree with part of it, but Egypt, in its new life, in its new republic, the third republic that is coming up within weeks, I believe with such a constitution, such a president, and free elections of president and parliament will definitely steer away from so many of what has been considered as bad management, and it has been really badly managed, no question.
So, with apologies to those who had their hands up, I am going to make this the last question because we're past our quitting time. Yes, sir.
My name is Zubair Iqbal. I'm with the Middle East Institute. I'm trying to move a little bit away from Egypt itself, trying to look at the region itself, and I think you're probably the best person to answer that question. What has happened to the region is, if I may say, not an unintended consequence of what happened, so-called Arab Spring. It had to happen that way. It was ready for the change to take place. Now we have a situation where political cohesion, which used to define the region, is largely under stress. Under those circumstances, economic factors, which at one time were the hope to bring the countries together towards economic integration, or at least rapprochement on that basis for the progress in the future, they are becoming more and more difficult to pursue. In your case, and you have touched upon it in a way with regard to security and other issues, what do you suggest should happen where the political cohesion is lost? How do you substitute economic factors and other variables to substitute for the political issues to generate an integrated region? Thank you.
Was that? Yes. That was good. You heard that, yes? Yes. Forgive me. Go ahead.
You are talking about the political integration.
Basically what I'm saying is political integration without accident doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So what we need to do...
Just a minute, please talk to the microphone.
The political integration has been under stress ever since the Arab Spring, and starting to show quite significantly now. GCC is one of the cases. What my concern is, if we are going to see a prosperous Middle East, we need to think in terms of alternatives for bringing the countries together. Political cohesion isn't enough anymore. You yourself said we are entering a different world. Yes, we are entering a different world, but the point is, what is that word that we are talking about? What is the role for economic integration among these countries to get there? The countries have to think about it soon.
Yes, indeed. I understand that point. I said earlier that we have to work to establish a new regional order. This new regional order should not be looked at only from the security or political prisms. We have to look at it from the point of view of developing a new economic integration system in the region. And the seeds of such integration are there, but it is the bad management. The sovereign funds, the banks, a lot of money, they are there. Plans, they are there. When you go through the files of the Arab League or the Council, the Gulf Council, or many other countries, members of that group, you will find a lot of plans. They have never been put into implementation or looked at seriously. So by talking about a new system, a new regional system, a new regional order, development, economic integration, and social aspects of it will have to be an integral part of whatever new order we would reach.
So I'm going to bring our discussion to a close here. I would just conclude by saying, Mr. Moussa, if there's one thing I heard from every questioner, it's a passionate interest in the future of Egypt. And I hope you'll take that back home to Cairo with you, because I know how heartfelt it is. So please join me in thanking Amr Moussa for being with us.